So my background, I was born in Great Yarmouth in Norfolk on the East Coast. I lived with my mother and husband at the time, and we lived in social housing in a place called the Shrublands. I think knowing what I know now and being, I guess, a bit more worldly, for lack of a better term, is that, you know, society seems to like to put people in boxes, and I wasn't necessarily aware I was in a box at that point in social housing. And I think people are judged just on the basis of where they live, you know, and I think that housing is effectively a human right, it's something that everyone should have, and the tenure of the way that you have that shouldn't really make a difference. And I didn't think it made a difference to me as a child. I didn't think about that. Maybe it made a difference to my mother at the time. Maybe she was judged even more than, say, I was at school. But I think it's relatively unfair to be judged just because of how you have your home. And I think the way that it's seen these days is as a last resort, when actually, you know, social housing is a foundation, is a springboard for people to thrive and to, you know, to either set themselves up. But some of the economic challenges have meant that effectively becomes a life choice, and that's where people live, and that's where people grow, and communities are formed, and, you know, life is life as such. So if we look at things like media representation, social media, all those things create a stereotype, particularly if we look at various TV shows that talk about social housing. They don't necessarily paint social housing in a positive light, and I think that what they do is emphasise on a small minority, and that gets effectively thrown across everybody who lives in social housing, which isn't necessarily fair. Social media, that creates stereotypes instantly, so there's a problem there in the kind of magnitude that that is then washed across people on just daily looking at their phones who may not have any thoughts about social housing. They find them, and then they have these biases about people that live there. And then you look at things like older government policy, so right to buy, you know, that creates sort of almost pockets of poverty in areas that were once all social housing, because people have purchased homes and then other people are still living in social housing. So I think you look at things like government policy, you look at the media representation, but then you look at sort of day to day of people maybe working in housing, working in that sector, and how language is used maybe, and how that can almost create stigma as well. And, you know, I guess not necessarily create it, but add to it in a way that we're all trying to do good, but without taking a step back and reviewing actually what is going on, or how are we talking to people. That can also emphasise stigma, I think. I think when it comes to that, sort of down to what we could do to trying to reduce stigma, I think it's a challenge in the first place, but ultimately based on the research, and I think some of my learnings, and particularly sort of living in social housing and speaking to people that I know, and their views on it, it's around sharing real positive stories about people that are living there, but also the purpose of social housing. So what is it there for? And I talked about this in the past around social housing is there to provide a springboard, is a foundation for people to thrive, and not a last resort. And I think we need to change the narrative that it isn't a last resort. It's a place for somebody to have a home, a human being to have a home, and to have somewhere that they can feel safe. I also think internally, so looking at housing associations, making sure that the true purpose of what social housing is reflected in things like inductions, you know, making sure staff are consistently trained on how to interact, using the right language, making sure they're not creating a them and us and all this type of thing. I think that is also key. And another thing is, if we look at the way that we build new homes, it is key that we have that mixed tenure approach. So, you know, blended. So, you know, we don't just have social housing in one side and, you know, say other tenures in the other. Like the blended approach to create that mixed community, I think is crucial. And lastly, things around repairs, you know, like making sure that repairs are delivered on time, that people aren't left wondering, you know, do I matter? Because that does cause an element of them feeling judged. So yeah.